Good morning, everyone. It's Craig Munro here. I am thinking of you all as you self-isolate because of the COVID-19 virus and wanting to spend some time in James's epistle. Hopefully that will encourage us. And my idea is to spend 5 times a week studying James's epistle for 5 minutes a day. So just a short little thought on James every day as we go through James together. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to come back to me. It's so important that we speak and share with each other at this time. If you have a Bible handy, let's read the James chapter 1 and perhaps just the first 3 verses. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, various trials, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, works endurance. And God will bless the reading of the Holy Scriptures. So why James's epistle now to study? What is it about the message that James has to bring that's so relevant? Well, most folk believe he was a half-brother of the Lord Jesus, and he witnessed the life of Christ over 33 years, perhaps. Certainly, he was brought up in the same home as the Lord Jesus was, and he has a ministry to us of Christ. I'm thinking of 3 things today that are pertinent to his message. One's about poverty, the other's about pain and suffering and trial, and the last one's about what we'll call practical Christianity. And these 3 things we're just going to see something briefly about. First of all, poverty. Well, James, was brought up in a poor home. He was brought up in a carpenter's home. His mother and father, Mary and Joseph, were poor. We know that because Mary, you might remember in Luke 2, brought up at the offering for the circumcision of Christ 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And we know from Leviticus 12 that was the offering of the poor. If she be not able to bring a lamb, then let her bring 2 turtle doves. So he was speaking from something. When he deals with poverty, as he does in this epistle, in chapter 2 he'll speak about a poor man coming into the assembly and a rich man. And he speaks about the issue of inequality. It's very important to him. He's speaking of something that's important to him. He speaks about the fatherless and the widow at the end of chapter 1. Why? Because his mother was a widow. Joseph died young. When the Lord Jesus was on the cross, he commends John, his mother, to John the disciple. He wouldn't have done that if Joseph was still alive. So when James writes about the widow, he's writing about something that's important to him. And he writes about the fatherless because he was fatherless. His father had died when he was young. So in the issue of poverty, he's speaking about something from the heart. And right now, there are many issues of poverty all around us. And we've been asked to look after the vulnerable and the sick and the aged, the fatherless and the widow, those looked after children, and indeed those who are infirm. And it's incumbent upon us that we listen to the ministry of James for today. Secondly, James speaks to us about pain and suffering. James himself had seen firsthand the trials of the rulers of this world against the Lord Jesus Christ at the cross. And he'd seen the aftermath of the resurrection as Christians had been persecuted and dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. That's why in verse 2 he speaks about the strangers that are scattered abroad, the diaspora, as the Christians are dispersed. And he's writing to those dispersed Christians. That's why in verse 3 he speaks about the trial of our faith. And so as he speaks about trial and suffering and to a dispersed group of Christians, perhaps we might just feel just now we're slightly dispersed too, as we self-isolate in our homes, unable to meet with other Christians, pray together and worship together. So he's a ministry for us. And as he thought of the trials and the sufferings, he speaks about an economic collapse in chapter 5. He speaks about the people who were living it up while others had nothing, and even defrauding people of their wages. And he speaks about an economic collapse. Well, are we not seeing an economic collapse just now? The G7 nations are brought to their knees, and we need to pray for them. And pray for the Christians who are wondering where the next meal's coming from, particularly Christians who are in a situation where they're self-employed. We need to remember them at this time very much. The third thing that James brings before us is what we'll call practical Christianity. His mantra is found in chapter 2, faith without works is dead. He had lived for 30 years watching the Lord in the house and in the carpenter's bench. He'd seen a man who never had preached a sermon nor performed a miracle, but live a holy, righteous life and kind to everyone. And as we study this epistle to James, it'd be wonderful if we learned that self-same lesson. It's Christianity in boots we need, not a theoretical thing in books. We need Christ lived out before us, and James has a lot to say about Christianity in action, where life and lip are consistent. Tomorrow, if we're spared, we'll look at 3 other things that are pertinent from James's message to our current circumstances. But let's just finish today with those 3 simple things: poverty, pain and persecution and trial, and thirdly, the issue of practical Christianity. God willing, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.